Now I do have to admit, after the most recent patch of Battlefield 1, I kind of got back into the game a bit more. There were a couple of releases that were taking a bit more of my time, but finally we're back in the tree of Battlefield 1. And it was interesting to see some of the balancing tweaks that have been made in the most recent update. And I think today is a good idea of just sort of having a look at them after an extended period of time and seeing the actual impact it's had on gameplay after quite a few games. Now, we're going to talk about sort of the 2 or 3, I suppose, major changes, and also kind of what's lacking as well. And alongside that, I think it's about time we take a look at a gun which has seen a pretty huge improvement since the last patch, and something I strongly recommend you guys using. So first and foremost, let's start off with the gun, because it's pretty obvious in the gameplay what I'm talking about. It's the MG15 Storm, which has just become an absolute monster in Battlefield 1. This thing has relatively good, if not slightly better accuracy from before. Its accuracy was increased in the patch. The damage is pretty damn good too, and the fact that it can now hit people from probably up to 150 meters away with ipso facto no problems just is immense. This gun is a close range machine, it's a long range machine, and it's got 100 bullets per magazine. Of course, you do have to pull back the chamber after about 35, but nonetheless, this thing can just absolutely rinse enemies left, right, and center. And I promise you, if you're on console at least, and maybe on PC as well, I'm not sure how applicable the new accuracy buff is on the other platform, but at least on the PlayStation 4 and on the Xbox One, this thing has just become an absolute powerhouse. And I strongly recommend, if you haven't given support a go before, unlock this gun and give it a go. And you will just not regret. I mean, you can have a look at the gameplay. It's pretty cool. It's something pretty... How can I describe it? There's something about being a support player that's very rewarding in terms of your versatility, your ability to take on vehicles, your ability to take out infantry, and just be this sort of multi-versatile player. And I think the MG15 Storm is finally the gun that suits the multi-versatile support player. But alongside that, we need to have a look at some of the changes that have happened, which do surround the support class as well. Now, the first one is talking about mortars. Now, mortars prior patch were a friggin' nightmare. These things were, you know, easy to throw down, easy to rinse 5 shells into one place with no problems in terms of accuracy, and they were just placeable every couple of seconds, and we saw explosive spam in Battlefield 4, and we don't need it again in Battlefield 1. But on the same flip side of that, it's quite difficult, because the last thing you want to do is nerf something to the point of being useless. The mortar in Battlefield 4 was pretty decent, and then by the time it sort of got to the end of the life cycle, the thing was just not of any use whatsoever. And the devs have done a really good job with this. So they made it so that you have to place the mortar down, but you can't use it straight away, and this is stopping people from just like Ramboing enemies by running up into their space, throwing down a quick mortar, and then spamming them, and then doing the same thing every 5 or 10 meters. You can't do that anymore, which is great. You have to think a bit more inquisitively and a bit more tactically about where you're throwing the thing down. The second one is that spam has been reduced because there's a higher deviation per shell if you're just firing and firing again and again, which is fantastic. And the final one is that no longer can you actually get a mortar as quickly as you could from ammunition packs. It takes a little while longer, which is exactly what we were looking for. Now, I appreciate this move from DICE. I think the mortar is a piece of equipment that could be fantastic in certain circumstances. We've seen it in operations where it can change the shift of an objective battle. If you're trying to get onto one, it's just a nightmare to get through the enemies, then, you know, a mortar can really change and shift up the game. But at the same time, they need to be used intelligently, not something that can just be thrown down and just abused at a wide-ranging level. They've also kind of flip-sided it as well, because they've thrown in some smoke rounds for the mortar, which is a really great addition. So they're now making players think a bit more about where they're firing, thinking a bit more as well about, you know, what shells they're using and how they can aid their teammates, which I think is a great move. The next one is about the support classes themselves, and they said, well, LMGs aren't that great, so what we're going to do is give them a suppression buff. I think a lot of people wanted a damage buff, but in actuality, as you can see with the gameplay that I'm like showcasing you right now, if you play with an LMG to its strengths, then it will absolutely 100% dominate most players on the battlefield. So the overall move to increase suppression as opposed to damage makes a lot more sense, but on the flip side of things, it's making things a bit more difficult for snipers and the medic rifle because they're getting sort of an indirect nerf with the support class being buffed, and I think there needs to be a look at the balance of that, because I'm seeing a lot of players who are using things like rifles at medium ranges who are getting outgunned now by some LMGs simply because they can't hit the target from suppression. And maybe the damage model could be slightly increased in favor of suppression, but it's something that just needs to be looked at again. And I feel as though there will be a fine balance for LMGs to be both useful, but not too impactful in terms of indirectly nerfing other classes too. Beyond that, there weren't really any other major changes in terms of balancing, but there kind of is an issue with that because people were expecting more. The Hunter shotgun, the Model 10, is just an absolute monster. It should not have the range that it has and is way too powerful on the battlefield right now. And I can understand some people saying, well, hey, look, it's about time shotguns became useful. They just don't need to be that useful. This thing can outrange a rifle from a certain distance of like 30 to 40 meters, and that's not okay, and that's something we don't really want to see in Battlefield as a whole, just because it can be exploited so easily in maps such as Amiens, which in fairness, sure, you're playing to your strengths, but you know, the fact that there isn't even a chance at a gunfight between a shotgun and any other weapon just doesn't seem to make sense to me. There should also be a look at the Automatico. That thing is way too fast firing. It doesn't have a place in Battlefield 1 in my opinion because it fires too many bullets. It's like 800 or 900 RPM and the hip fire on it is absolutely ridiculous too. And at least on PC and not on console, you know, controlling that thing is just a breeze. It's really not that difficult to do at all. And the final sort of last hurdle of all of this is the gas grenades. Like, there was no nerf to those things at all, and they have some serious problems. First and foremost, the gas grenades just leak through buildings and walls that you just wouldn't expect them to. Like, I was on the upper floor of a building the other day, and it got thrown into the floor below, and somehow, because I was on low health, I ended up dying anyway, which just isn't okay, and I think that pisses a lot of people off as a whole when something just shouldn't kill you, but it does, and that's what the gas grenade is doing a lot of. Secondly, it kills way too quickly. That thing can do 15 damage per like few seconds in the actual gas itself, and it's quite easy to just wipe a lot of players off the board because they've been hit with a few bullets. They don't even have time to react to put a gas mask on, and then they're dead. It's something that definitely needs looking at as a whole, and I just feel as though it can be improved in a way that again makes it useful, but doesn't put the use too far and doesn't make it, you know, something that is just an absolute pain or stain on the game at the moment, which I personally believe it is. But in terms of other things, I think balancing is doing okay. I think, you know, we're in a good position where things can be improved. I personally think the Hellriegel is also looking slightly a little bit too powerful, and I was quite concerned that for some reason the bar had also been nerfed. Like, the gun only has 20 bullets per mag. You know, it's one of the few LMGs that's good. There shouldn't have been any nerfs to that, but there was some in some respects in terms of recoil and accuracy. I just don't think that was necessary. I think some balancing efforts need to be looked elsewhere as well. I'm actually noticing behemoths are dying too quickly now, which is a bit weird. Like, the airships seem to be going down so much faster than before, which is something I think is just a tad bit odd, but as the whole sort of weapon and equipment balancing is looking pretty good. The final real thing I have to look at is the balancing on operations, and I'm sure DICE has the statistics as to the win-loss ratio of attackers and defenders, but quite frankly, in my opinion, there needs to be a relook at the increased tickets and increased capture time for the operators. I'm going to do a separate video on that, but I personally don't agree with the changes to their complete extent, and I feel as though the attackers have a way bigger advantage now than they actually should. But that's about it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this quick footage and, of course, the introduction of the new MG15 God Gun. It's been me, the Tactical Brit, and I'll catch you again soon with another Battlefield video in the coming days.